Firstly, for the folks who don't know Harry, I've had the pleasure of working with Harry for quite a bit of time now. An amazing background, a phenomenal CFO leader, over 25 years experience, taking 3 companies public, very recently had a phenomenal exit with Acer, and I think tons to be incredibly proud of throughout your career. Held roles at the C-suite level across just the CFO level. So very excited here, Harry, to dive in, learn a bit more about you and your background and the challenges and the successes that you've had throughout your career. And more importantly, provide value back to our industry. You know, we all breathe the same air as we go through the biotech world. So, Harry, I'm going to hand the mic over to you. If you could jump in and tell us a bit more about some of your background to begin with, that would be amazing.
Sure, happy to, and thank you for that kind introduction. In terms of my background, kind of going all the way back, I'm a Russian Jew. My family immigrated to the United States back in 1980, so that's, 44 years ago, to pursue the American dream. After graduate school, I went to Wall Street and spent 5 years at Morgan Stanley and Lehman Brothers, learned a lot, and then over the next 25 years, so I'm 30 years into it now, as a chief financial officer, I also did stints as, I was also for a while a CEO and COO. I built, financed, operated both public and private life sciences companies. I took 3 of them public. So overall, raised some $270 million, oversaw 14 clinical trials, and these were across oncology, orphan diseases, infectious diseases, and that included 2 pivotal phase 3 trials under special protocol assessments. I supported multiple pre-commercial efforts, as well as finally a launch of a drug, of Olpruva, and I, along the way, executed on 5 M&A transactions. 3 of those were part of the going public transactions, some 5 partnerships. So, you know, time flies when you're having fun, and 30 years goes by, so to speak. But I think what's very important, certainly for the listeners, is, you know, that this was not a smooth path forward. Time and again, we faced what seemed like insurmountable challenges. These obstacles that included clinical data surprises, FDA regulatory events like complete response letters, and of course always the challenges of the capital markets. But I just always kept pushing through, right? Trust in the process and working toward getting to those successful outcomes. You know, a personal turning for me in my career was, you know, we talk a lot about patient journeys, of course, right? That's very important. It's about the patient, so much of what we do. So for my journey, my personal turning point was in my mid-20s when I was on Wall Street, and both my parents got diagnosed with cancer. And thankfully, they're both around 80 years old, still alive today. But at the time, it was that feeling of hopelessness and really wanting to, not knowing if my parents were going to be around, and how do you deal with that? And so that got me thinking a lot. Do I go back to medical school? You know, what do I do? How do I leverage this? How do I get in front of patients? And so it was based on that calling that over that subsequent 15 years, went out and built Novellis Therapeutics, really from a concept. Built it into a $500 million peak market cap public company that was focused on oncology. There was also infectious disease aspect, raised close to $100 million for that company. Took it all the way through a pivotal phase 3 trial in non-small cell lung cancer. It was a single pivotal registrational trial, great science, but it told us definitively that the lead drug did not work. It was immunotherapy before its time, and so here's a data setback for sure that had to rebuild from that, and did that around taking a private cancer target oncology company, taking that public via the Novellis public vehicle. But yet, and there were 3 products, 3 shots on goal, so to speak, but yet more data setbacks. And it happens in our industry. You just got to kind of push through it. And over the past 10 years then, most of that spent as a chief financial officer at Acer Therapeutics, took Acer public in 2017. We achieved a peak market cap of $330 million, raised more than $170 million, got all the way through to approval of Olpruva, and that was December of 22, so just over a year ago. But yet, far from a smooth ride through. There were a number of regulatory data setbacks. So it's not for the faint of heart, for sure. It's exciting, though.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that. And I think a common trend that I'm hearing here is that the idea of trusting the process and being resilient and persistent and continuing to take one step, at a time is often the key to continue to grow. And Harry, clearly in that 25, 30-year span, right across investment banking and then moving into industry and being so successful, I imagine that had its advantages as well. I mean, what would two pieces of key advice that you would suggest to anybody who's an executive within the life sciences world who may encounter some of the challenges you've had? What would those two key bits of advice be that you would share?
Sure. First and foremost, I would say to be, as a leader, to be a resource for your boss, for the board, for your colleagues, of course, for your direct reports too. Focus on making everyone perform better. Try to help everybody succeed. Of course, as an individual performer, you also need to, be flawless in your execution. That's important. But it's being that resource. More than 10 years ago, I was sitting down with an executive coach, and we were kind of going through and the things when we were starting out. And so I was asked, okay, put together an org chart. I was like, okay, well, no, so here's me as a leader, right? And then here are the reports, and here's how it works out. And the coach said, and talk about the things that I did, and and such and so on. And then he kind of looked at me and said, all right, so here's how this works. Took the org chart and just flipped it, right? So that I was underneath. And it was kind of that aha moment, which is something I was always working toward, but it just crystallized this whole concept of being a resource. And I just think that's so important. And that's how you win, by being that resource to and importantly to your boss, to the board, to really everybody you're interfacing with, make everybody better. I think that's a really important learning that I've had along the way, and I certainly passed it along. The other one, as you picked up on right away, is it's that you need that intestinal fortitude, yes, but you got to trust that process. Focus on the things that you can control, and you drive that operational excellence. But you got to be ready for the unexpected, whether it's going to be a data surprise, regulatory setback, the challenges in the marketplace. Got to be ready for that. So I would say those are the two: being a resource and trust in the process.
And as we talk about successful leaders, what would be some of the things that folks who are building biotechs in 2024 should be targeting as an organization in order to have a successful venture and continue to build a successful biotech?
Yeah, I'd say, and we're certainly seeing that right now, is I would say first it would be having innovative and differentiated products, because you want to be addressing that significant unmet medical need for patients. And two, especially I think this year, is and maybe I'm biased being a chief financial officer, but it's having that smart and efficient spending. You really want to aim for that high return on investment. And since December, where we're seeing life sciences investors just make huge bets, right? Both in private and the public company space, we're seeing it. But I think that's also, it's driven by that, I think, innovation, differentiation, and addressing unmet patient needs.
Yeah, I think 2024 is going to be an incredibly interesting year. I think 2023 was challenging. I think for a lot of different businesses, and Acer had a fantastic exit, which was phenomenal. But but likely one of a few. I think it's been tough, and I think there's a balance, and a lot of people step across 2024 and what to expect, and especially after JPM, I can almost sense from our executive folks there's so much more optimism to what we can expect this year, and I think those biotechs that continue to innovate, strategically spend, and think about growth, and I think when we talk about culture within these organizations, I often find that that's a critical point for almost every leader that I speak to. What culture are we building, whether it's a small biotech or a larger one? Over the years, I find a common trend typically tends to be a collaborative culture, a down-to-earth driven environment with folks that leave egos at the door and want to impact patients, and a high performance culture. What would your take be, Harry, on how you drive a successful culture and what those characteristics are that you've seen work extremely well?
Well, I think it's just like you said, driving the successful, it's got to be leaving, egos, at the door. Can't have that. I think that is so important. And it's being, it's where the management team, it's got to start at the CEO level for sure, right? Driving, having the vision, and kind of getting everybody in the boat to row in the same direction. It's just so important. So echo exactly the sentiments that you've said. It's a lot easier to talk about it when you actually get into the trenches. And when you're literally in battle of, right, when you just had a negative data event or a CRL and you've got, the stock is down like 80% and then you're a public company and you've got everything from lawsuits coming your way and the restructurings and all the things you have to do. Difficult under those times to remember that you actually, to be calm and focused, laser focused on your execution under that kind of pressure. But I think putting together in a culture like-minded individuals who band together and kind of can trust the process together and push through. And I've seen that multiple times with my companies, because when it comes together, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And Harry, I think you alluded to some of them just now, but challenges as an executive leader, I think nobody's short of those. There's constant war scars and battles that you go through day in, day out. I would love to hear a couple of key challenges and war scars and stories you might have to share, and how maybe the perseverance pushed you through those.
Yeah, sure. Well, and that's exactly right. It's these negative data events or the complete response letters from the FDA, which, they come as a surprise. It's out of your control. And then it's where you have to do the restructurings, as I was just saying. And then in addition to, you have to terminate great employees. And that's always really hard to do. And that's I mentioned resolving lawsuits and class actions. And you have to do the proactive vendor management and getting through that. And you have to be very creative with how you raise money when you have a low market cap, right? Because, how do you handle dilution and such? So it's got to be kind of parallel processing on the equity, debt, partnering, strategic fronts. So in terms of examples, I've had kind of more of my share, in complete response letters at Acer, when unfortunately I had two of them to work through. And so, for example, one, when we had, Etsivo was a drug for vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, where we had great life sciences investors. Everybody was expecting approval from the FDA, but the FDA required us to do an additional clinical trial. We were ready to launch a drug into this ultra-orphan disease. And so you have to rebuild around that. The second CRL we got was actually with Olpruva. So that's the drug that was approved in December of 22. But the original PDUFA date was in June of 22. And that complete response letter, we were ready to launch that drug. And that complete response letter came because the FDA wasn't able to get out and inspect the third-party contract manufacturer for packaging. So this had nothing to do with efficacy or safety of the drug. It had nothing to do with the drug manufacturing. It was one of those technical things. We only found out about it when we got the complete response letter. And that's tough, right? It's tough to navigate through that, especially we had our debt financing tiered to the potential approval. But it's just banding together and pushing through. And we got to the eventual approval. Or it's on the regulatory side when you're negotiating your label along the way, but then we get approval, but then there was also a change in the label that, given supply chain issues, required a 6-month delay in getting drug into channel. Right? It's things like that. They're out of your control, but you have to deal with them and you have to push through them. In terms of the data events, I'd mentioned my first company at Novellus Therapeutics, where we had a pivotal phase 3 trial in non-small cell lung cancer, and when we were very optimistic going into with 3 phase 2 results, but when we flipped that card, the data showed definitively that the lead drug did not work. And it was such good science, it was actually presented as an oral presentation at ASCO, right? Because it was a pivotal registration, 900 patient study. But nonetheless, since the outcome was negative, it was definitive. And so I had to rebuild the company following that. Of course, the capital market challenges are always there, right? They're in one shape or another. Sometimes they're tougher conditions. But for example, one instance that I want to share with the listeners is in 2008, right, when we had the Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers going bankrupt, and when I had great investors in the company at that time, but they themselves, literally the capital markets were frozen. And the only way to finance out of it was to go where the money was, and that was strategics, right? And to do partnership. And so fortunately, I did have a parallel process ongoing and was able to do an ex-US partnership with the parent company investing in the company. And so that we were down to less than $1 million of cash in a pivotal phase 3 setting, burning well more than that on a monthly basis. So that was definitely one of the close ones. So I would say those are some of the examples that just had to keep pushing through. And of course, to your point with the Acer exit just last year, given the tough market conditions, given the setbacks that we had and the delays, we also had another phase 2 program that could have been a best-in-class NK3R inhibitor, but that in March of last year, the data readout on that showed that there was no efficacy. So how you get around that versus doing bankruptcies, running the process, getting and trying to get investor interest, and we were very close thanks to a lead institutional investor who ended up buying up the senior debt, and we were very close to doing an equity recap and doing all that last summer. But it was the M&A process with Zevra Therapeutics that took front and center, and we ended up selling to them. So that was obviously a good outcome, but very complicated. Many transactions had to be gone through a part of that, and of course parallel tracking along the way there. So as you can see, lots of gray hair and battle scars to show for for the experiences, but it's been a great ride, and can't wait for my next adventure.
Yeah, and I think evidently, based on some of the things you've just shared there, I think there's a certain type of DNA that makes up a successful executive leader within a growing biotech, and you've done this a few times round now. What do you think some of the drivers are in an executive leader? One, for when maybe you're interviewing candidates for potential C-suite opportunities within your company, and also I think over the years what you feel allows you to have the characteristics to drive through and build these companies and deal with the challenges and the stresses and the unplanned activity that goes along with it while you're managing a budget that's not as lucrative as some of the big pharma companies. I mean, what do you think drives those people, Harry, and what would you say towards that?
Yeah, and I think it's not a simple answer to the question, right? And this is why the number one challenge, I think, for a lot of companies is bringing the right individuals on board. And it's not just getting the great individuals, it's getting them to work together, right? it's a challenge. It's always been a challenge, especially since you could have a great team, and now it takes one member of the senior leadership team or such that can just uh, kind of rock the boat, and then the whole team is performing less. So I think to generalize it, I think you definitely want to have leaving the egos at the door. You want to have management teams that are in it for the right reasons, right? They want to help the patients. They want to drive that innovation. They truly want to be a resource for each other, right? They truly want to succeed on that basis. And my former boss, Chris Schelling, the CEO and founder of Acer, he used this analogy, which I think is great. In football, right, where you have to do your job, right? You have to be out there on the field. You're doing your blocking and tackling. You have to do what you're assigned, but you also got to have your head in the game to see what's going on the field, right? You got to see, is there an opportunity? As long as you've got your end covered, is there an opportunity to help others? Is there an opportunity to help and make a play and to back somebody up and do something without obviously jeopardizing what it is that you're assigned to do? So that's kind of like coming back full circle to kind of an ideal executive, I think, is where really, most of, a lot of employees, but in particular for leaders, is those that can excel and have the right expertise and background. They can execute their job and as close to flawless as they can. But it's also if they can be that resource to help and to see where they can kind of add value to the organization. And I think that builds a winning team, because you're going to be facing all teams, all companies. They're going to be facing challenges that are out of your control, and it's just the way the nature is. And you can hope for the best, but that's not a plan. So I think that's how you get there.
And Harry, what are we most excited about in 2024? What do you think are some of the most exciting areas to keep an eye out for? What are you personally, interested in seeing be successful across this year?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, and this is I think probably for most folks and the investors who are looking, it's really comes to addressing the unmet medical needs of patients. And whether it's across rare diseases, oncology, CNS, psychiatric, cardio, I think there's still so many patients with no treatment options that the more that we can move the needle in that regard, the better. And I certainly look forward to being a part of another venture looking to do just that.
Excellent. And I think I want to end on a high. You, of course, had such a fantastic exit there with Acer, as we spoke about earlier in the conversation. Tell us a bit about how that fell and the build up to that. I know that we were speaking over the summer, and you were head down and consumed by the workload and what you were involved in terms of getting the result. Talk to us about how that felt on the exit and what that experience was like.
Sure, happy to. Yeah, it really was, and it was an incredible transaction. And the process leading up to it was, look, we wanted to go and launch the drug ourselves, and that's what we're embarking to do. But given the delay in the FDA approval by 6 months, right, and given that corporate finance strategy was tied to the debt financing, and then what happened about a year ago, with the failures of the banks started coming out, and so the debt markets kind of went away, so it was harder to get debt. And then with last March, I mentioned Acer's other compound product we were developing for induced vasomotor symptoms. That phase 2 study showed no activity. So you were kind of left with, yeah, it's great, we have an approved drug, but it's not going to be in drug and channel for 6 months. So it was this very complex kind of equation. So the other pipeline wasn't bearing fruit. We had a pivotal phase 3 program ongoing too for Vascular-Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, but that data readout was a couple of years out, so that wasn't playing a near-term value. So we're really struggling from a valuation standpoint, and therefore it was difficult. So how do you finance the company? How do you do that? and given the challenging markets. So that's where we worked, and our CEO did a great job building the relationship, evolving it with our lead investors, getting to that point of whether the lead investor bought up the debt that we had, and we're working very hard towards doing a recap of the company and doing that equity financing. A part of that, by the way, had to be one of the creative financing tools that I was able to help bring to Acer was doing a deal with Relief Therapeutics. That was a Swiss-based pharma company that a couple of years ago, once we had the setback around at SIVO and we rebuilt and we were moving Alpruva forward, right? So how do you do that? Low market cap company and such. So we ended up doing a creative collaboration where they gave us $35 million, and in exchange, we promised to pay 60% of the net profit of the program. So it was an innovative kind of and creative collaboration that allowed us to have the funds to get to approval. But then, as part of doing any kind of a recap of the company or potentially selling the company, right, we had to buy those rights back. And so in parallel, that's a negotiation that we had to have. And so that's what we had to line up, whether we were going to sell the company to Acer Therapeutics or we were going to do an equity recap. And all of that had to come together kind of at once. And so it was a very busy last summer. And then we announced the deal with Zevra because that ended up making the most sense for us to do. And we announced that end of August, but that's, as a CFO, my job wasn't over then, because then you still have to close it and you have to get the shareholder vote. And of course, kind of operating the company and before we were closed, and really every penny counted, right? Because we were so low on cash. And that was definitely continued to be a challenge right through the closing, because to get shareholder approval, we had about 30% of the votes that we knew that were existing investors. But then there was retail investors for the rest. So it was quite a solicitation effort. And the transaction made a lot of sense, certainly versus the alternative. And we were able to certainly come through and on the first time get the shareholder vote. I remember it was November 8th. So then we did it, right? So we got it. And then it was just a matter of just closing the transaction. And we closed on November 17th. So it was right before Thanksgiving. And I'll tell you, that was a great Thanksgiving. I think first Thanksgiving in many, many years where I didn't have corporate email. I didn't have Teams. It was, just time with friends and family. So that was pretty cool.
Fantastic. And that's why I wanted to end on that. I thought that was an amazing end to, kind of 23 for our industry. But Harry, thank you so much for coming on. You've been a pleasure to bring on to BioBytes. And I'm sure the viewers will hopefully take something from that. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jack. Certainly enjoyed it.